patience during those technical issues. I really appreciate it. My name is Courtney Clark, and I work as an Innovation Fellow in the Office of Innovation at the Peace Corps. And we've been running a pilot project to teach OpenStreetMap in DCPS schools, and I want to tell you all about that today. So, go ahead. So some background on the Peace Corps. Some of you might know what it is, others not. We might even have returned Peace Corps volunteers in the room. Anyone? No, there's a lot in DC, so I always ask. So we are the U.S. government's international service agency, and we send American volunteers abroad to countries that have invited the Peace Corps for 2 years of service. So we never go where we haven't been invited by a host country. And right now we have over 6,800 volunteers in 65 countries, and they do both development and cultural exchange activities. So our 3 goals, we were founded in the 1960s by President John F. Kennedy, and our goals have remained the same ever since. So first goal, just helping the people of these interested in countries to meet their needs for technically trained men and women. So that's sort of the development side of what we do. We have volunteers working in agriculture, education, public health, economic development. And then our second 2 goals deal more with our cultural exchange. So it's both helping Americans better understand the host countries where our volunteers serve, and then helping those host countries better understand American culture and sort of fostering peace and friendship between countries. Okay, so more specifically, Peace Corps and our relationship with OpenStreetMap. So like I said, our volunteers live for 2 years, usually in smaller rural communities throughout sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, Latin America, and other countries. And so their specialty is really local knowledge and developing profound relationships with their communities, because they are spending 2 years. They're really not paid well. So our volunteers live at the level of their local community, wear local dress, eat the food, follow the customs as best they can. And they're really great at small grassroots development projects. So here's a picture from my service in Guinea. I took this picture actually. A friend and I, we did a bike tour from health center to health center in our region, and we just did small 20-minute talks on how to take care of a mosquito net. So very small projects, but they were done in the local language. That's what volunteers are good at. What we're not so great at this point is like sophisticated use of data. So our average volunteer age is about 28, and most of our volunteers are generalists when they join. So they might have an undergraduate degree, maybe a little bit of work experience, but they're not like your typical development professional. So they don't maybe understand monitoring and evaluation the way a development professional would. And they aren't really using data to drive a lot of their decisions. So we have a small but growing OpenStreetMap and geographic data community of practice that I work closely with, and I'll tell you a little bit about their projects. So one example, one use case that I really love, this is Connor. He's a volunteer in Nicaragua. He's an education volunteer, so he teaches English at the middle school and high school levels. But as a secondary project, he is really interested in OpenStreetMap. So here he's doing training of trainers in Spanish about mapas. You can see on his slide. So he's just teaching people in his community the importance of geographic data, what OpenStreetMap is, and this is all in preparation for a Fiesta de Mapas that they're going to hold in his town of Nueva Guinea. And they're actually going to be walking around doing mapping as a community. And then the community itself will decide how the data is used. They've definitely pinpointed ecotourism as one of their needs, but we'll see what else they do with the data. Another use case that I really love is from a volunteer, Teresa in Botswana. So she's a malaria prevention volunteer. And last fall, she sent out a call. She made a YouTube video and taught her friends and family back in the States how to map remotely. We created a task for her on the manager So they made a base map for her site, and then she and the health center used that base map to conduct like a geocoded survey of houses that have participated in an indoor residual spraying campaign. So if you'll go to the next slide real quick. This is a picture of indoor residual spraying. It's essentially spraying the insides of houses with pesticide, safe for humans, very deadly for mosquitoes. And if you can spray 80% of houses in a community, you are starting to break the cycle of malaria transmission. If you go back to the other side, thank you. Problem is, though, that this has been happening in communities for years that have no idea how many buildings are even in their town because they don't have that geographic data. So she was able to pinpoint exactly which houses hadn't been sprayed but wanted to be sprayed. They just weren't home that day. Presented that to the lead entomologist in Botswana's National Malaria Control Program, and they were able to plan for a second pass and knew exactly which houses to spray. It was very low budget, and that bumped them up to the 80% rate. So very sophisticated use of data that we're trying to cultivate in more of our volunteers. Okay, but we're running into a problem. So a lot of our volunteers, they're living at the end of the road with no electricity and very little access to the internet, or internet is very expensive, both for themselves and for their communities. So we have a lot of tasks right now up in the task manager, and they're just not being completed partly because they aren't like part of a natural disaster. These are just ongoing development issues. We're doing as many mapping parties as we can, but we do have tasks that have been up for months and are just not being completed. So that's the first problem that we're trying to solve in this project. Problem number 2 is this Worldwide Schools program that we have. So this is the classic Peace Corps pen pal program. It was founded in the 1980s as a way for Peace Corps volunteers to send letters back and forth with American classrooms. This is the cultural exchange piece of things. You might write about your daily life in your village, or if you're a teacher, even have your students in Senegal write letters to a classroom in America and have that exchange. It's a cool idea, but it needs a refresh. And OpenStreetMap is the perfect refresh for that because it adds a very tangible action for these students to do instead of just writing letters. And anyway, who in 2015 has ever seen like a modern student write a letter? Probably not many. And so OpenStreetMap, we decided, was like a very interesting way that these students could take a tangible action to help the volunteer and actually participate in development from their classrooms rather than just hear about it in a static letter. So I love this. It's a child in 2015 who was handed a Game Boy. And then our other problem related to Worldwide Schools is we simply need more classroom participants. So right now we have 784 volunteers who are doing this cultural exchange. 716 teachers are involved, but we have a waiting list of over 1,000 volunteers who still haven't been matched with classrooms, which of course is a big problem. And so you can go ahead. So we started building some goals and objectives for solving these problems. I mean, generally we want to build the capacity of volunteers to use OpenStreetMap and GIS in the field. Our end goal actually is volunteers doing skills transfer of GIS and mapping to their community members. But to get there, they still don't have quite the internet access to build their base maps. So our objective right now is just to complete more maps for more volunteers in their communities faster. And then our second goal is just to keep improving that understanding of other cultures on the part of Americans. Always important to peace building. And so we want to increase the number of interactions between volunteers and volunteer communities and average Americans, or in this case, American citizens. Okay, so we hypothesized that we'll both increase the number of OpenStreetMap edits and these school participants if we insert OpenStreetMap into Peace Corps classroom interactions, because as I said, it's a much more interesting program for a teacher in a classroom to be involved in, so we're assuming if we offer this in our suite of tools, maybe more teachers will get on board. And here's just a model of the program. So we have a local community that has mapping needs, and the real interaction that we're shooting for is between them and then the students who have a capacity to map remotely, facilitated by Peace Corps volunteers and educators, and then specifically working with geography classes, geography clubs, and service groups who maybe need community service hours. Okay, so right now we're in the midst of our prototype. I don't know if you're all familiar with human-centered design. I love it. It's always a great grounding process for me when I'm doing a project. And so if you are familiar, you'll know that human-centered design approaches or encourages prototyping, but it's not the idea that you have to prototype an exact model of the project that you're going to do. You just prototype the things that you don't know, or maybe the riskiest parts of your idea. And so we sat down and we figured out, well, we don't know how to teach students OpenStreetMap. We don't even know if they'll be interested in OpenStreetMap, or teachers will be interested in this. So this is what we're going to figure out through this little pilot project. So here's a picture of 6th graders, literally like a 15-minute walk from where we are right now. They're mapping for Peace Corps projects in Botswana, Senegal, and Mozambique. That's the first part of our interaction with these classrooms, is just teaching them how to map for a Peace Corps project. And then we also connect them to the actual volunteer in the field and a community member if possible, but time change makes that kind of difficult. So a lot of times volunteers are doing a Google Hangout or a Skype call with the students. It's very late at night for that volunteer, and it might not be appropriate for that volunteer to invite like a colleague to their house super late at night because of the cultural context. So we're dealing with that. So here again are some 6th graders. They're chatting with the volunteer in Nicaragua and his wife, who are teaching OSM skills in the community. And we found this to be really the most exciting and engaging part of our program for students. It really brings the mapping activity home to them and makes it much more real than when I'm just up there teaching them how to edit OpenStreetMap. So far, we started about March. We've trained 67 students who are taught by 5 different teachers. We have about 15,000 edits and an average of 320 edits per student. Now, if you're thinking 14,700 divided by 67 is not 320, you're right. And that leads to one of our first lessons learned, is that you should be, if you're trying to track the number of edits that a student makes, be very careful to get their OpenStreetMap username and not their email address. We face this even with the brilliant high school seniors that we've been working with. They somehow don't understand the difference. So it's a small tip, but important. Other takeaways, we've learned that the demand does exist. So it was a little bit difficult for us to sort of publicize this to different schools. Pretty much the only opportunity we were given was a small blurb in a newsletter to educators, and then a small blurb in this educator portal for all of DCPS. And we received a lot of demand, in fact, almost more than we could handle in this small pilot project. So that's really exciting. We've also learned that if you're working with students on OpenStreetMap, going through structured groups and clubs is the best for data quality. So yes, if you're working in a classroom, you have a forced captive audience, but we've also found we get much poorer data in those situations. So we work with service groups, academic honor societies, and then there's lots of geography clubs, surprisingly. And that's where we're getting our highest quality edits and data, because the students are choosing to be there. I've also learned personally, just training students in OpenStreetMap to set small, simple goals. So one big mistake we made with our first classroom is I think we just expected too much of the students right away, and we're more focused on just getting a lot of edits out of them, and thought that they might pick it up pretty quickly, which was not the case, at least for middle school students. So now when I teach OpenStreetMap to a group of students, I start with the goal of just tracing 5 buildings, and then we do a status check and make sure that all of those 5 buildings have been tagged and the corners have been squared and everything's been saved appropriately. And then maybe we'll do 10 buildings. It takes a lot longer. You don't get as many edits, but again, that data quality is there. And then finally, just connecting students with the field is really key, or actually any participants in mapping parties or mapping events in general. So yes, it's meaningful if I can talk about how to help us prevent malaria, but it's so much more meaningful when a volunteer in the field can tell you that same thing. And that's what Peace Corps has to offer, is our network of almost 7,000 volunteers around the world that are ready and willing to talk about OpenStreetMap. So this is just a little display of some of the interest that this has been generating. So this is one of the teachers we're working with. And when we worked with him, it was just this past Wednesday, he said, this as an OpenStreetMap is exactly what we have been looking for years. So he's kind of a leader among a cohort of geography teachers in DC, and he was absolutely blown away. And he's already been spreading the word to this network of geography educators around the world. If you want to check out what they're doing and the conversations they're having, they use #WorldGeoChat. And actually very recently, their leader posted, how do we deal with moments like Nepal? And I saw that tweet, and I was like, this is the perfect opportunity that the HOT community could be connecting with schools and giving them an opportunity to, for example, map for Nepal. But these teachers just right now, they don't know about OpenStreetMap or humanitarian OpenStreetMap. So I think there's a big untapped community of mappers that we need to think about working with, because they are interested in mapping for Nepal, for example. So what's next up for us? So our Office of the Third Goal, which runs that Worldwide Schools program, they are going to be unveiling a new toolkit for volunteers and return volunteers, and OpenStreetMap will be sort of a flagship part of that. So that will be presented to hundreds of return volunteers at a conference in California, and we'll be training them all in OpenStreetMap. They'll go back to their different communities around the US and start connecting with schools and teaching them how to map for HOT. We'll also be holding digital trainings for volunteers and return Peace Corps volunteers, like trainings of trainers, so they can work with schools. We're starting to work with Stephen Johnson and others at Teach OSM, and we'll hear from him in just a minute. But we're excited to maybe offer some of what we've learned from interacting with middle school and high school students to maybe add on to the curriculum that they're building. But we're also looking for other opportunities and other partners, which is why I really wanted to present here today. So if anyone is interested in sort of building up this program to bring HOT OSM to classrooms around the US, I would love to work with you. Like I said, we have this network of 700 teachers, and I think if we start introducing HOT OSM as an option for them, we could grow that network even more. And we have 7,000 volunteers in the field that could be mapping and connecting with these American classrooms. So that's my pitch. I hope I can find some people to work with here, and I would also love any feedback that you guys have on this program. So yeah, I'll open up the floor for questions. Thank you so much.
Small round of questions. Suppose you're aware of the teachosm.org, so are you gonna interact and maybe make all of that one methodology, or is it like, how do you guys interact, I guess?
Yeah, so Stephen and I actually just just connected a few weeks ago. And since then, I've been directing all the teachers that we work with to get familiar with the TeachOSM curriculum. So that's been actually extremely helpful for us, so that when I get to the classroom, the teacher is already familiar with everything using that curriculum. And Stephen and I still have some talking to do, but yeah, that will hopefully be a partnership. Yeah.
This is a great initiative just to start. And it seems like you're working mostly with like middle school age or high school age kids. And so I'm wondering how this could be adapted also, or if it would be the same for university or graduate student level students. Just because maybe they would then be able to, if it was just to work faster, that's one thing, or to apply, you know, the validation components or something like that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and we've been talking with Richard and the other professors at GW about how we might also connect. So those are all things that we're looking at. And yeah, the university opportunity is especially exciting because of course that is where you get the highest quality edits and where maybe students are actually assessed on how well they're editing. That's a little tougher to do with a 6th grade class. So we're very interested at doing this for all those levels. Yeah. It just happened to be a lot of 6th grade because in DCPS, that's the year when students learn geography. So yeah, that's how that worked out. Yeah.
Hey, I know there's a lot of Peace Corps volunteers in DC. Is it organized like by country, or are they just like a big club, or like how do you work with those guys?
Sure. So there are a few different structures. There's RPCVs of Washington, D.C., which is a huge group. They're very supportive of this mapping, and they're actually probably going to help do the big training of trainers at the conference in California. So they're kind of, we're hoping they'll take this on as a flagship part of their work, going to schools and doing OpenStreetMap. So yeah, we work closely with them. And then there are also all sorts of country of service groups. So Friends of Guinea or Friends of Liberia, for example. And we're starting to work with a few of those groups as well to do mapping parties for their specific country, etc. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.